Okay, so yeah, very welcome to the Vienna Writers podcast and the Datenschutz podcast, and also a very hot, warming welcome to all the people who are watching this via the Orwell Society website and their channels. I'm really happy to be here today. Yeah, with Quentin Kopp. You're currently the chair of the Orwell Society, right?
Yes, I am. Yes. Well, I stand for election, having practically taken over after the last AGM. I stand for election in April when we have our next AGM, which we will be using this medium for again, and which enables us to have worldwide reach of our members from GMT plus 8 hours to GMT minus 8 hours. It's great.
Wonderful. And also here with me is Richard Blair. Hi, Richard.
Oh,
And Fenna Williams. Hi, Fenna.
Hi.
And you're also a member of the Orwell Society.
Yes, and a very proud one as well.
How it comes that we're here. The thing is, I'm one of the organizers of the yearly Privacy Week in Vienna, that is. And I invited you guys to have a talk over there. And then because it's 2020, or it was 2020 at that point, things didn't work out as we all would have liked them to be. And then we said, okay, let's do a podcast episode instead. So this is why we're here. And yeah, probably let's start maybe with Richard in that case. So just a warm-up question here. So who are you and what are you normally doing?
right. Well, I'm Richard Blair. I'm the adopted son of George Orwell. And for the Orwell Society, I'm one of the trustees, but I'm also the patron of the Orwell Society as well.
Okay, and I'm really happy to have this chance to talk with you and also with Quentin and Fenna, and it's a big honor for me. And I was really nervous before, and then we had a lot of technical issues, and now I'm trying to find my way into the whole thing. Quentin, you already said you're the chair. Would you like to talk a bit about how you got there?
How I got it? Well, the Orwell Society is 10 years old now, and it was the inspiration creator of Dione Venables, who is the cousin of Jacintha Buddicombe, who was Orwell's childhood sweetheart. And she came across the idea because she republished a book called Eric and Us by Jacintha, with additions to it that she made after Jacintha's death. And she asked Gordon Bowker, who probably the best of the biographers of Orwell, to proofread it in a sense and assess it. And he said, well, I'll only do this if you publish it and we get going. And that led to a number of essays she had on a little website, and more people saying to her, why isn't there an Orwell Society? And she said, why isn't there an Orwell Society? And indefatigably overcame a lot of male chauvinist objections from various people who ought to know better. And the society came together. I wasn't there right at the beginning, Richard was. And I joined when Richard invited me to September of the first year's operation. And you'll have gathered that Dione's not a shrinking violet by any means. And at my first meeting, she said, well, we've all got to have a role. You look like somebody who gets things done. Will you create events for the members? So I continue to do that. And I created our George talk that I invited you to join us for in a couple of weeks. And visits like Fenna's been on to Jura and to Spain, and in fact she deputized for me for Spain because I wasn't well enough to travel after an operation. And we do all sorts of different events, and that's what I do for the society now.
Wonderful. Fenna, what are you doing there?
Sorry, I was just distracted because of the cats. Sorry.
Yeah, cat content, of course.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the question was, how did you come to join the Orwell Society, and what are you doing there?
Well, actually, I liked Orwell all the time from my childhood, and when I was on Jura, where I usually go because of just normal holiday, I knew that he wrote 1984 there, and up to that time I had seen everything, every bush, every tree on Jura, but not the house where George Orwell wrote 1984. And I mentioned that to a good friend of mine, and he said, we can arrange that. I will give Quentin Kopp a call, or you can call him yourself and ask if there is a trip going on. So that's what I did. And hooray, for the last few years, that was the best thing I've ever done. So I actually joined right away, went right away with Richard and Quentin and some other really nice people. They're only nice people actually in this organization, to Jura. And last year we went to Spain together, to all the places of the Civil War where Orwell has fought.
2019. Last year, nothing happened.
And so that was, to me, actually, it is also the beginning of rereading everything again, everything I can get a hold of in English now. Before that, I had read everything in German, and now I'm trying myself on English. Helps.
Yes, lost in translation is not just a word.
That's right.
Richard, if I understood it correctly, you were a little boy and you were with your father on Jura at the point when he wrote 1984 then. Is that correct?
Well, yes. I mean, I do recall being, when we lived in London, in a place called Canterbury Square, we left Canterbury Square, I suppose, in the summer of, well, he went up to Jura in May 1946. I joined him a few weeks later. And because by that time, the reason why he went there, of course, was because his great friend David Astor of the Astor family had an estate on the island of Jura. And David said to him, look, you need a break. This was after Eileen, his first wife, had died. And David said, look, you need a bit of a break. Why don't you go up to the West Coast, to our estate on Jura, and just take a couple of weeks, which he did. And then came back and said that he liked it so much that he decided that he would like to, well, not so much settle there, but like to take a house of some sort, and looked around and found Barn Hill, which belonged to the people above, the estate above the Astor's estate, and decided that this was where he would like to go. This, of course, was Barn Hill. And because he'd always been thinking about his island in Scotland. I don't know where it came from, but I think the reason was that he really wanted to get away from London. It was London had been, was in a bit of a state, very grey, he said. And so there we were. 1946, May, I went up there in about June of 1946, joined him up there. And so there we started. He arrived there. The other person who came up with him, or very soon afterwards, of course, was his younger sister, Avril, who came up to look after the house for him. And ultimately, of course, looked after me. When I arrived, I came up with my nanny. Everybody has a nanny. And who looked after me in London after Eileen had died. And so she arrived with me, and we settled into the house at Barnhill. It was very Spartan. There was very little furniture, but it was comfortable enough. It was wind and watertight. We had food. We had probably more food than most people would have had in London, because we had access to beet, we had access to rabbits, we had access to lobsters, to crabs, fish. So we were relatively well off. So here we were. We have my father, we have Susan Watson, my nanny, and we have Avril and myself. Now, unfortunately, Avril and Susan Watson fell out for various reasons. Basically, the reason was that Susan Watson insisted on calling my father George, because that's how she had always known him. And Avril said, no, that is not his name. His name is Eric. And Susan said, no, it's George. No, it's Eric. And Eric won. And Susan, who had a boyfriend with her, I believe left in the middle of the night to get away. So there we go. And off she went, back down to London. And I didn't see her again, I suppose, for years. But yes, literally back in the 1980s when I saw her again. So there we are, ensconced in Barnhill. And for the first year, 1946, my father did no writing at all. He literally took a break from writing. He probably wrote a few articles, and but set about getting his garden going, digging his garden over. And he was relatively quite fit, I suppose. Bearing in mind, of course, later on, his tuberculosis came back. And he'd had an episode earlier on in 1938-39 when he had to go to a sanatorium with tuberculosis. But when he came out, it seemed to have quietened down. But I don't think wartime had helped him at all. He was working very, very hard. He worked for the BBC. So I think he had rested a little bit when he got to Jura, and his health wasn't too bad for the first year. And there he settled down to cultivate his garden. So that takes us really to the end of the first year, and with us now settled in Barnhill.
Sounds really calm and yeah, and with the possibilities to actually rest.
Yes, I mean that's what yes, I think he did rest, and he was okay. And he just enjoyed being. I just enjoyed being with him. He enjoyed being with me. We would go out fishing most evenings. It was a nice year, actually, 1946, very hot. And because he says in one of his domestic diary entries that when he was digging his garden, it was very, very hard, very dry, and very stony. Well, the stony bit, you can understand that the soil on Jura is not very fertile, and it's very thin. But nevertheless, he established his garden. The one thing he was very, very conscious of was that because I had a tendency to run around in bare feet, I was going feral by this time quite quickly. So running around in bare feet, he was very concerned that I might get bitten by a snake. And he was very conscious that there were snakes. And it's quite interesting that in his domestic diaries of the few, he doesn't write obviously for all 4 years when he's there, that he kills a lot of snakes. So they are quite plentiful. I know that when we've been there subsequently, I don't think I've seen one at all.
Hmm.
But nevertheless, in those days, there were quite a lot. So there we are. He has a lot of friends come up. Young people, his nephews and nieces, of course, come up. And a cousin of mine by the name of Catherine, her name was Catherine O'Shaughnessy in those days. She was the adopted daughter of Dr. Gwen O'Shaughnessy. Now, Gwen O'Shaughnessy's husband, who sadly was killed at Dunkirk, but he was the brother of Eileen, my father's first wife. So they were all very friendly. And it was Dr. Gwen O'Shaughnessy's house in Greenwich that the Blairs used to congregate during the war and immediately afterwards. She eventually went off to Norfolk to practice in a place called Swaffham. But she always kept in touch, and she was my godmother. And she would come up with Catherine to Barn Hill. It was quite interesting. My father, when he wrote letters to people who wanted to come and visit, gave a long spiel of instruction as how to get to Jura, because it was quite difficult. It was about a 2-day journey from London. And I have to say, it's not much shorter today. In many ways, it's quite remote in trying to get there by public transport. So he gives you this long list of instructions, how to get to Barn Hill, and remember to bring waterproof and stout boots. Obviously, presumably for the bloody stakes, I suppose. And so, yes, it's a very gregarious household a lot of the time. And there are all sorts of people, good, bad, and the ugly. We did have one chap called, Paul Potts, who was a sort of a Canadian sycophant of my father's, who would turn up. Av couldn't stand the sight of it. I think my father just kind of quietly tolerated him. But eventually there was also the occasion, and in fact, this must have been very soon after we arrived, because Susan Watson was still with us. This is before she really upset Av. That's somehow something happened, and Paul Potts disappeared off he lost his temper and just disappeared in the middle of the night. He always seems to disappear in the middle of the night.
It's a trend.
There seems to be a pattern.
Yes, yes. So far, apparently what happened was that I think Avril or Susan Watson was looking for something to light the fire with, and she found some scrap paper. Apparently, it was Paul Potts's beginning of a new book.
Oh no!
He took umbrage at that. Well, I can't say I blame him really. I think I probably would as well.
Oops.
So that's it. But Paul Potts, in all joking apart, was the most appalling man. He really was, and I met him in later life, and he was really somebody. Sadly, you really, really would not want to give house room to. But I'd leave it at that. It was very sad.
But honestly, Richard, if everybody left at night, this is for a writer's circle as well, and I could just see a lot of brain waves going, They all seem to be, and it's a very, very remote place, and everybody leaves in the night.
Well,
Leaves.
for the simple reason that the ferry left at 10 o'clock in the morning. It took you several hours to, I mean, it was 25 miles away. We're talking 40 kilometers to go from Barn Hill down to Craig House to get the ferry. So you would need to leave in the middle of the night to be in time.
Richard, I always meant to ask you this. I hope, Klaudia, I can barge in.
Please
there.
do.
Did you have your own boat, like a motorboat, or was it
Yes.
for rowing?
Yeah, no. We started off with a small rowing boat, sort of 3.5 meter long, 4 meters, with an outboard. Am I going to be talking in metric or in imperial here?
Metric.
Keep it metric. So we had this little dinghy, which was 3.5 meters with an outboard motor. And I think we did improve on that. Now, this was the boat eventually, the bigger dinghy, which was about 3.5 meters. This was the one, of course, that we had this famous adventure in 1947. 1947 was a so-so year. I think the summer wasn't too bad, but we had a lot of people staying again, nephews and nieces. The nephews and nieces of Orwell were, of course, the children of Orwell's older sister, Marjorie, who married a chap called Dakin, Humphrey Dakin. And these were the 3 children of that marriage. They're still alive, by the way, Jane, Henry, and Lucy. They live in the Lake District. Jane will be 98 in March. Henry, I think, is 4 years younger, and Lucy's 2 years younger, but again, and relatively hale and hearty. I think Henry's lost the plot, but that's by the by. Jane is okay. She's getting a little bit slow now. But we had this weekend when all of us, that is the 3 nephews and nieces, myself, my father, Avril, went round to the back of Jura to have a weekend of rest and recreation. Some of them walked over the hill. Some of us took the boat round to this little bothy, which is an old shepherd's cottage. And there we had a wonderful weekend. Some of them walked back over the hill, but 4 of us took the boat. We had to go back round through what is called the Gulf of Kopp, which is a famous stretch of water, which is very tidal and very dangerous and has this whirlpool, supposed to be the 3rd largest whirlpool in the world. Well, I take issue to that, but nevertheless, it's a very, very dangerous stretch of water. And we were trying to come back, and my father, and interestingly, I've just read recently that I've always told the story that he had misread the tide table coming back. Well, he misread the tide table because he made the bloody tide table up himself and had not consulted the proper nautical almanac. So it was a bit hit and miss, I think. Half an hour either way can make a big difference. And we got caught up in the tide and lost the outboard off the back of the dinghy. And Henry, who had just finished his national service, was commanded to take the oars. There was Henry, Lucy, I was sitting in my father's knee in the stern, and Henry was commanded to take the oars and pull for the nearest piece of dry land, which happened to be an island just in Kopp itself. So there we got to this island. He jumped out, pulled the dinghy up the rock, and what happened was that the swell, there's always a swell running there, receded. We slid back down, the boat flipped over upside down, throwing my father and myself underneath the boat, and well, we managed to scramble out and get ashore. Now, it's one of these things, silly accident, you know. It could have, but the point was, it could have turned it into a tragedy. He could have banged his head on the rock and be dragged away by the tide, because the tide was running quite swiftly past this little island. And so, but anyway, we all got ashore, and I think he said to Henry, it was a close run thing.
It's a big lump of rock. It's rather a grand name to call it an island. just a big rock.
Well, it was isolated from everything else. And so there we were. He managed to try to get a fire. We lost everything out of the dinghy, of course, was gone. Blankets, whatever was in the dinghy had all gone because it turned upside down. However, we were rescued by a lobster fisherman who happened to be coming through with some tourists, and they picked us up and took us back and took us round to the other side, where we walked a mile home without any shoes.
Maybe 1984 would never have been written.
Well, indeed, I mean, he was, you know, he was halfway through writing it. So no Orwell, no 1984, and we wouldn't be sitting here talking to each other, I guess. So I know that when we arrived back, I think Avril and anybody else who was there said, "Oh, where have you been?" "We've just been shipwrecked." "Oh, yeah, okay," and carried on working. And it was all taken bloody casually. I mean, nowadays it would have been, "Oh my God, we'd have had the lifeboat out. We would have had, oh, it would have been all hell to pay." But,
we would have it as news. We would have it as breaking news.
oh, breaking news!
Orwell shipwreck.
Well, it did make the Scottish Daily Express, so somebody had reported it. So that was our little incident for 1947. Oh, that was the same year I split my head open, or cut my head, watching my father making some wooden toys. He loved making toys for me, and I think what I should really say here is that the problem was that he knew that he was slightly infectious. He was very conscious of trying to establish, because don't forget I was an adopted child. I'd had there's been a fair amount of, not trauma as far as I was concerned, but disruption in the sense of my first 2 years or so, because my mother had died when I was 10 months old. And so obviously establishing a relationship with fathers and mothers was a bit difficult when one of them is dead and the other one is running around trying to work, trying to go to Germany to see what's happening, and trying to make arrangements for people to look after me. So there were lots of people looking after me at a very early age. So this was his first opportunity on Jura to try and establish the father-son relationship, which of course had been really rather disrupted by then. His relationship with me was fine. What he was worried about, of course, was my relationship with him, to establish that he was father, in the sense that, you know, he would say, "Well, Papa," whatever I called him, father, daddy, or whatever, when you do that automatically. But it was a more deeper emotional relationship that he would be concerned about. So when we were there, then of course he realized that he wasn't as well as he ought to be. He knew having had TB, he felt that it was coming back on again. And so TB being an infectious disease, he then had to distance himself at least 2 meters. And as it were, and so it kind of was breaking the established relationship a little bit, and so that was what worried him deeply. But I was looked after. Crikey, I was looked after extraordinarily well. Avril was a wonderful aunt and looked after. So there was the Blair family, by and large, were not what we would call huggy kissy sort of people, as we are today, you know, where everybody's kiss this and kiss that.
As we would be if we could.
We're all on 2 meters distance.
Yes, yes, well, we rather miss that at the moment, don't we?
Yeah.
Deeply, but in those days, that doesn't mean to say that I wasn't loved. Of course I was. And I have to make this quite clear that, you know, I was loved as his child. But hugs and kisses just wasn't the sort of thing that happened in middle-class families of the day. And he was very, actually, in many ways, he was very conservative about such matters. He was very progressive in a lot of ways, but in other ways, he was quite conservative because that was his upbringing. I mean, he was quite progressive in the sense that when he first engaged Susan Watson, she said to him, "Will it be all right if he plays with his thingy?" Which he thought was probably okay. Now I'll let you work out what playing with his thingy was. And you may want to cut that, I don't know. But,
No.
So yes, I mean, joking apart, again, he was a very good father in the sense that he was quite progressive in the point that he would change me, bath me, feed me, and do all the things that a mother would do. Notwithstanding the fact that I didn't have a mother at that particular moment, or had, but he had to take over when she died in March 1945. So he was happy to do that. But nevertheless, he also wanted to work. That's why he engaged Susan Watson as my nanny at the time when we were in London. So here we are, growing up on Jura, and it was a wonderful place. You just open the door and I just went to walk out and do what I wanted, where I wanted. There was nothing to worry about. No pedophiles, no traffic. You could get lost, I suppose.
Richard, did you ever miss not having other children to play with you?
Well, probably if I was capable of analysing what my emotions of as a 3 and a 4-year-old, I suppose yes. But I must have had plenty of things to do, and I just made up my own games. But I did see people. He did have a lot of people coming during the summertime. And I always enjoyed company when people came. I was quite gregarious, although I was very slow to learn to speak. Apparently, he thought I was a bit backward at that point. But one picks these things up. And so there we are. We've got 1947. I've split my head. We've been shipwrecked, and also, actually, I see in your list of things, when I do a reading, I will do a reading which includes something else. So that might be of interest to you. So I'll stop talking for a moment, and you can ask me more questions later on, or carry on, or whatever. Maybe some sort of break.
I could listen to you for the next 3 hours. No problem with that. But probably a short question to Quentin. As I understood it, your father, except that he also died quite early, right?
But they died within months of each other, as it happens.
Yeah, but was he one of those people who visited?
No. My father married twice. So his first family, he had four boys and a girl. The eldest of those went to Edinburgh University when, around the time I was born. We lived in Scotland then, and in fact, in the only place apart from the TB hospital in East Kilbride that we know from his diaries that he visited in Scotland. My father was well known in inverted commas through Homage to Catalonia, which, I mean, it's Orwell's experiences in Spain that was the start of the thought processes that culminated in 1984, and the experiences of people like my father who were fighting Franco but imprisoned by the Russian secret police, effectively, for allegedly being a Trotskyite. And in fact, the last thing that, very bravely, because they were wanted to be arrested as well, Orwell and Eileen visited my father and said, and he said, well, cheerfully, we'll all be shot in the morning. And Orwell said, well, if you ever get out of here, and you do come to London, because he was a Russian who was living in Belgium, come to Crooms Hill that Rick mentioned earlier, where Gwen and Erica Shaughnessy lived. He did, and that's where he met my mother, because my mother was a sister of Gwen. So, so Richard and I share an aunt, as it were, and therefore share a cousin. But also, of course, we have the connection through our fathers having, you know, friendships made under fire, as it were, a pretty enduring friendships, I think. And there certainly was.
I think there was a little addendum to that story, is that when he first went, and I'm trying to work out exactly there are two parts to it. When he first went there, he had what was called a lorry,
Yeah.
which had been sold to him by Quentin's father, which had broken down. Now, the lorry that, as far as I can see, was in fact an 100-weight Ford van, the forerunner of a transit, and that the lorry didn't appear until much later, way further forward to about 1949, an ex-army lorry. So it's a bit difficult to, I'm trying to work out what it means.
I think people have made an enormous amount about that story. The reality is that Michel, my eldest stepbrother, as it were, would not have been a guest at Barn Hill if you know, our fathers had fallen out.
Oh no, I don't think so. I think it's just, I think that sadly the vehicle had broken down through no one's fault.
And vehicles then were
pretty
not
unreliable.
as reliable as they are now, shall we say?
No, absolutely not. So, but anyway, yes, you were still chatting away, Quent.
Yeah. So I mean, so that's the connection. I mean, it started as Orwell being in a group of soldiers led by my father on the Aragon front, and then I mean, the well documented parts of the May incidents in Barcelona, where my father posted Orwell on the roof of the Polyarama, and when the Orwell Society go to Spain, well, the first time I went over with my wife, and we cased the joint, as you might say, and made contacts, which enabled me to organise a trip. And one of the key people is a chap called Nick Lloyd, who does various walks around Barcelona. And about a fortnight before we were going on our first visit there in 2012, I think it was, he emailed me and said, would you mind if I contact the scientific institute that own that building and see if we can get in? And we did. In fact, we're the only people that are allowed to go in and go up onto the roof. And it's an amazing place, isn't it? All the artifacts they've got, their scientific instruments and what have you. Fantastic.
It's not surprising if you saw the bloody spiral staircase that you have to go up to get onto the roof. Well, he wouldn't let anybody go up.
Well, I mean, how he came down this very narrow spiral gate with a gun down his trouser leg. I mean, he's over 2 meters tall, with a gun down his rifle leg, so that the guards don't think that he's about to attack them by carrying it.
Very difficult, yes.
It's quite an achievement.
Interesting, yes. But I heard interesting stories about that roof from Fenna already.
Yes.
I guess you visited there, right?
Oh yeah, we go there every time we have a visit. We go up on that roof. In fact, we do a fair bit of roofs, because we also go when Orwell got shot through his neck. Two things about that. One, when he eventually got to Barcelona, the POUM, the militia he was with, had a large house on the edge of Barcelona, which they used as a sanatorium. And that has a nice roof that you can walk up, and we go up on that. And in the Orwell archive, there's a drawing that was done by my father, who was an engineer, to send to Eric O'Shaughnessy to explain exactly what the trajectory of the bullet was, and you know, for his expert medical opinion.
Actually, does any of you two know anything about Orwell meeting Willy Brandt at the time?
No, I don't. I mean, it would not be surprising, but yeah, because there were so many people. But I think he was.
They were there at the same time, weren't they?
Yeah, but I think he was probably more likely to have been with the international brigades in Madrid rather than in Barcelona and Aragon. But I don't know.
I think somebody had asked that question before or mentioned it. And I'm just trying to think whether someone said, well, it possibly might have happened, but I can't verify it, I must admit.
No.
At least they were both in Barcelona at the same time.
They were, yes, yes, indeed. Yep.
World is so small.
It is a small world. Indeed, it always is.
Yeah, I mean, who's to say? I mean, it's entirely possible, but equally, it may not have happened.
But
nobody's documented it that we know of, put it that way.
Yeah.
But anyway, I suppose just going back, to talk about him actually writing 1984 at Barn Hill. He was very structured in the sense that once in 1947, when he really decided he would have to get stuck into this book, because he'd only written a few couple of chapters or so, that he would work, he would have breakfast, they would work in the morning, go up to his bedroom, and he typed, by the way, you asked the question, what did he do, whether he used a pen or typed. He mostly typed. And he would type in the morning, come down for what he would call lunch at 1 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, whenever, and then go back and work in the afternoon. And then at 5 o'clock, he would come down and have what we would call in Scotland high tea. And then we would go, if it was nice weather, we'd go out fishing together. When I say together, my father, myself, and Avril, and possibly anybody else who was staying. One of the people who did come to stay quite regularly was this very good friend called Richard Rees, another old Etonian. God, the story is littered with old Etonians all over the place. The damn school has produced all sorts of people, most of them you wouldn't want to meet, but never mind.
Like Rees Mogg, for example.
Half the British government passed through Eton, who gives that impression anyway. So anyway, yes, he typed mostly. But yeah, he did use a pen from time to time. If you ever see the facsimile of 1984, that was taken from half of the manuscript that survived after his second wife's death, Sonia. She sold or passed on the manuscript that was left, because he made, the one thing that he insisted on was all his working manuscripts to be destroyed. But this one somehow got through fell through the gap somewhere, and an American lawyer picked it up, and it was the first half of 1984 in its original format. And Professor Peter Davison, who was the gentleman who in fact eventually did the 20 volumes of the complete works of Orwell, this magnum opus, which took him years was decided that he would get a hold of this manuscript from the lawyer in America, brought it back, and he actually, what he did was, he took an original page, had it photocopied, and on the other side, he would then give you a fair copy in different typefaces that you could actually read. Because a lot of the original was, coffee stains or tea stains or cigarette stains and splodges and things that you had to work out what the hell it was. And Peter Davison said that, and painstakingly went through word by word and did you a fair copy. So that where my father had I think even on the first page, he had overwritten several lines with a pen and written in what he thought it should be, the correction. So you couldn't read it. So if you ever see a copy of this, they are available. They're quite expensive. They're anything from 30 to 100 pounds. That's 50 to 120 euros. If you can get a hold of it. If you go onto various websites like Amazon, so you can probably find these copies. It's a big, heavy book. I've got actually sitting down here.
You're just looking for mine, actually. That's why I turned around a minute ago.
I'll just out of interest, I'll get it.
Yeah. He'll get his more easily. I think mine's buried behind me.
For all those who only listen to this episode as a podcast, I can tell you behind Quentin there's a whole wall full of books.
Massive.
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
Oh, there it is.
And I'll try and.
I'm surrounded by books. Books here, books here. Books.
Yeah, I have that upstairs. So
to me that
all my books are everywhere. Do you see?
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, that looks like it would in my manuscripts too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. As writers, we can very well relate to that.
Yes.
It starts off being a white page, and it ends up making no sense to anybody but us.
But basically, yes.
Looks like a spider went through the inkwell, does it?
And the cat.
But the interesting thing is that looking at these sort of documents is that you can get an idea of how the writer's mind works. Today, you would sit down with your laptop and you would type up several pages. At the end of the day, go back and you would reread it and you would just simply delete and put in and change it. So you would have no idea of what the original looked like. So to an extent?
Depending. This is depending actually. So I'm mostly typing too, the first version, and then I'm printing it out and reworking with, I like pencil and sometimes a pen, and then it looks basically the same. And then I do the corrections again in the computer, but this is how I do it. So Fenna, how do you work?
Well, I write every word that I later give to the publisher. I write everything by hand. Everything by hand. I can't remember that I did, well, maybe an article, maybe type, and then I speak it into the computer. I dictate it into the computer.
Okay.
And that is when I actually hear is what I'm writing. Does that have a nice sentence harmony? Does the dialogue work? Would anybody speak like that, Fenna? And then I do already corrections, and then I go print it out, work on it, print it out, work on it around 20 times. Yeah. So a lot of trees die for me before the book comes out.
Certainly in 1984, a lot of it has been overwritten more than twice, where he's typed it, scored it out, and corrected it, and then corrected the correction again. And he said by the time he had finished, he said it was a terrible, terrible mess. And I'll go back in a few moments, but what happened was at the end, he tried to, when he was very, very ill towards the end of 1948, when he had more or less finished it by mid-1948, he had to get this thing squared up, made into something that somebody could read. So he asked David Astor if he knew anybody in London who might come up and a good typist and type it out for him. Unfortunately, there were, for reasons we don't know why, nobody could be found who would go to Jura and type it out for him. So he had to do it himself. And that was what crucified him in the end of 1948. He more or less collapsed. And that was when the doctor said, we've got to get him off Jura. He needs to go into a sanatorium. And that's when he left in 1949. He'd already been in hospital in Glasgow during 1948. At the end of 1947, he was taken to this hospital called Hairmyres in Glasgow, which was a sanatorium where he was given streptomycin. David Astor had managed to procure from the United States a quantity of streptomycin, which was brand new in those days, and he had to get permission from the Home Office to have it imported into England and, well, into the United Kingdom, and for it to be administered to my father in hospital. And he started on this course of streptomycin. Unfortunately, he was allergic to it. And after about half the course, his fingernails fell out, his hair started to fall out. He developed huge ulcers in his mouth, in his throat, and around his lips, and his lips would stick together with bleeding. And he had to stop doing it. They had to stop administering it. It had done some good. Incidentally, he also underwent a procedure, which must have been very unpleasant, was that they crushed what they call the phrenic nerve, which controls the lungs. So they put a lung out of action, stops you from breathing, put it out of action, and then pump you full of air. The other lung is working, but the one that they were trying to treat, they filled you full of air.
I heard an interesting follow-on story from that yesterday. There's a theatre company in the Scottish borders who've contacted us and want to create, in the first place, a radio play because of current situation. There's a very famous rugby sports commentator who came from a town called Hyke in the borders, called Bill McLaren, and he contracted tuberculosis as well. And of course, the first discovery of antibiotics was also by a Scot, Alexander Fleming. The residue that wasn't given to Orwell was given to 5 patients over near Edinburgh, one of whom was Bill McLaren. He recovered, one of the others recovered, and the other 3 died, which is not surprising. Eric O'Shaughnessy, who we were talking about earlier, was a pioneering thoracic surgeon, heart surgeon. And his problem always was that people wouldn't let him experiment on patients that their current doctor thought had a good chance of recovery. They gave him the no-hopers, and Bill McLaren must have been in that no-hoper category, and he recovered and lived for a very long time. So yeah. That dose of antibiotic did do some good, even if it didn't help Orwell too much.
no, it helped him for a while. He came out and he was in hospital in Hairmires for, oh crikey, nearly 7 months before he got home. Didn't get home until June, July of 1948. So he must have worked damned hard from then on to November of 1948, when he finished writing, finally finished writing 1984, and managed to get it bundled up and sent off to his publisher. But certainly, he said when this business of taking his, putting his lung out of action and had to be pumped up every week. So sounds like your bicycle's got a slow puncture. Oh God, the tire's flat. Where's the bicycle pump? Pump him back up again. And he said it was an extremely unpleasant experience. But he was very stoical. He never complained about the treatment he got. So that was his first, not the first time, but on Jura, that was Hairmires was the first visit to a hospital. And then, of course, by the end of 1949, that was when he collapsed. And it was in end of 1948. It was January 1949 that he left Jura, and left Jura forever, although he didn't realize that, to go to a sanatorium down in Gloucestershire in England, where he could be closer to his specialist. Where he stayed until the autumn of 1949, and then he was then transferred to University College Hospital in London, which was where he got married for the second time to Sonia Brownell, who had been a secretary to his other Etonian friend, Cyril Connolly. People from Eton were turning up all over the place. But I went down to Gloucestershire in 1949 and stayed with some very strange people, and used to go and see him on weekends. And said, "Daddy, where does it hurt?" Because as a little boy, you're in hospital, so because something has hurt you. Well, of course, you couldn't see where it hurt, and so I didn't understand that it was an internal problem. So I think I probably saw him for the last time the end of 1949, possibly at the beginning of 1950, but then 2-3 weeks later he died. I was back on Jura when he died, and so the rest of us were. When I say the rest of us, there was Avril, of course, his younger sister, but by 1947 we had staying with us a man who had lost his leg during the war, a chap called Bill Dunn. And he came to Jura to learn about farming, and had moved in with the people above us in another little farmhouse just above Barn Hill, slightly north of Barn Hill. And but he came to live with us because my father asked him if he would run the farm for him, because my father wasn't capable of doing it. Because by this time, by 1947, we did have a few sheep and a few cattle, and a pig and some geese and some hens. And so Bill Dunn was the man who looked after it. And in fact, you said you wanted me to do a bit of a reading for you.
Yes, please. I would be really honored.
I don't know how much you want me to read. Would you like me to read a whole book or just a couple of sentences?
If you have the time, we can also have a book.
As long as Zoom allows.
Well, I'll do it now, actually. This is from Orwell, A Life in Letters. It's quite a useful book because it publishes all his letters. Again, was edited by Peter Davison. This is a letter to David Astor, dated the 9th of October, 1948, Barn Hill, Isle of Jura. And he is writing to David. He's talking about what Mr. Dick, the doctor, has been saying about him. Any kind of journey seems to blah blah blah. To walk a mile or pick up anything let's have it, you can't do, mustn't get cold, etc. So second paragraph goes like this. Richard is tremendously well and is out of doors in all weathers. I'm sorry to say he took to smoking recently, but he made himself horribly sick, and that has put him off. Well, it did until I got to school. Actually, I stopped smoking about 40 years ago. He also swears. I don't stop him, of course, but I'm trying to improve my own language a bit. The weather has been absolutely filthy, except for 3 or 4 days just recently. Bill Dunn managed to get all his hay and corn in early, but a lot must have been spoiled elsewhere. The farm is building up. He now has about 50 sheep and about 10 head of cattle, some of which are my property. We also have a pig, which will go to be baconed shortly. I've never kept one before. I shan't be sorry to see the last of this one. They are the most annoying, destructive animals and hard to keep out of anywhere because they are so strong and cunning. Shades of Animal Farm here. Because they are so strong and cunning. We have built up a bit of garden here now. Of course, a lot of it has gone back owing to my not being able to do anything. But I hope to get an Irish labourer to do some digging this winter. Even this year, we've had quite a few flowers and lashings of strawberries. Richard seems interested in farm and garden operations, and he helps me in the garden, and it's sometimes quite useful. I would like him to be a farmer when he grows up. In fact, I shouldn't wonder if anybody who survives will have to be that. But of course, I'm not going to force him. I'll leave it at that. That was just one of his letters, one of his many letters. When he wrote letters, like people write emails, and sadly, lots of the letters survived because people he sent them to kept them. But the return letters were all lost, sadly.
I think you should explain exactly what happened with this smoking story.
The sub story to smoking was, of course, I'd found an old pipe in the garden. I don't know whose it was. It doesn't really matter. It was broken, but the bowl was there and half the stem. And of course, my father was a heavy smoker, very heavy smoker indeed. He smoked what was essentially what we call black shag, which was really like tobacco pipe, pipe tobacco. And with also, you also bought what were called Rizzlers, which were cigarette papers. Now, he was always running out, so you would have to do a roll-up end.
Bless you.
Bless you. You should stop smoking if I were you. He would use a newspaper, to tear off a piece of newspaper and do a roll-up that way. He was very good at rolling. So at lunchtime, he would smoke and throw his cigarettes into the fireplace behind him. Always sat at the same place with his back to the fireplace. Threw his cigarettes in. I found this damn pipe. Got down from lunch, started to fill the bowl up with his cigarette ends, and then asked for his lighter, which he just passed down without a break in the conversation. Passed the lighter down behind his back. I tried to get it going. Oh well, you can imagine what happened next. Well, three things happened actually. Oh, three. I turned a delicate shade of green. The world started to spin like a centrifuge, as I describe it. And lunch reappeared, but not quite in the same format as it went down.
Oh dear.
Which was inevitable, really. And that put me off until I got to school. But as I've just said, I stopped smoking 40 years ago. Never bothered, haven't since. So that was so. There was the third. That was smoking. I split my head, and we nearly drowned all in 1 year. That was enough for 1 year.
That seems so. when you mentioned Animal Farm, there is that comic film that we watched
Oh, yeah.
when I was a kid, and I got so upset about it. It made me really upset. How can that be? It was, yeah. So as a kid, it really rattled me. So.
Well, it was a very well constructed book.
Yeah.
That all the animals were perfectly placed in societal order. Yes, who else but the pigs would be the leaders? If you stop and think. It was the thing about what Animal Farm was. This was one of those. I always think that his first wife Eileen was very instrumental in helping him develop that story, because it's quite different in many ways to everything else. All right, his writing was always improving, book by book by book, but somehow Animal Farm stands out as being. It was quite a different book in the sense that it was a sort of a fairy story. But nevertheless, there are things in it that kind of, something different about it.
My mother always told us that it was Eileen's idea to turn it into that allegory rather than, because to be critical of Stalin at the time he was writing it wasn't thought politic, shall we say.
No, quite.
And I mean, he had great difficulty getting it published as it was.
So yes, I think that my mother was very, very influential in that book, and that's why it turned out. It's such a complete book. If you read it, you could read it obviously at several levels. I know that the cartoon you're talking about is the Hallis and Batchelor one. Was made in 1954 with the aid of the CIA or CIA's money, but that's another story.
But the normal working method was that he would write something, she would type it up, and they'd talk about it, and maybe she put on the back of what she typed.
Little suggestion.
And if you trace the first book that he wrote that she had any involvement with, because it was around the time they met, was Keep the Aspidistra Flying. But if the first one there was any real influence on was Coming Up for Air, and the characterization and the input of psychology in that book is much greater than anything he'd written prior to meeting Eileen.
Women have good influence.
Yes, and we all as writers do have influence during several times of our lives, and some of them are really groundbreaking, and they persist. Yes.
Indeed.
Yeah, I totally understand.
But not all of us are writers.
No.
You have to understand.
Why not, by the way?
I'm not looking at you, I'm looking at myself.
Yeah, but why, by the way?
Yeah, right. Richard, why don't you write a memoir?
Bloody idle, I suppose. It's like hard work, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Isn't it, Klaudia? Writing is hard work.
Well, you know what my father said about writing? It's like having a bad illness.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
The writing was like that.
Yes, and at least the last part is the hardest. So just 1 or 2 weeks before something's finished, or at least for my part, this is the 2 weeks before something's finished, and I can already see the finish line.
Oh, that's.
I don't know if you have the same expression in German, but we say the darkest hour is just before dawn.
Oh, that's very good. Yeah, that's right.
And it's so fitting. And I would totally love to just work 72 hours through and just get it done with, and but I can't because I have to sleep, and then I can't sleep because I have to think. And no.
Exactly. Yeah. But really, Richard, I mean, all these stories that I think that would interest a lot of people. Don't you think you should find somebody whom you can tell it to, and he writes it down at least?
Or she.
Why, are you going to offer?
Probably she will.
Together with Klaudia, maybe.
Yes, maybe. We can do that.
Yeah, we can do that. Women can do that. Women can do that.
I'm not sure that a biography of Richard Blair actually is going to be a bestseller. Whoever writes it.
I'm actually not
the
sure.
biography of the son of George Orwell that sells it. In the same way that when Mark wrote the book about my father, your father's name was the banner headline rather than.
Well, yeah. Yes, well, it might sell a few books until they read the first few chapters and they go, bollocks to this.
Yeah, but all those very private stories, I already told Fenna at some point. When I was at university and I studied philosophy and English, I almost always read those those books, Rororo Bildmonographie. So you have like a book with a whole lot of pictures and a whole lot of personal stuff about the person the book is on. So I love to get to know the people and to understand how they were thinking, how were they living, which made it much more easy for me to understand the actual work, because I could understand and think or try to think like the person behind. And all those personal stories are shaping the human being behind the works.
Yeah. I think, Richard, you should really think about it. I mean, even if you would do it in episodes, like episode 1 year, or episode on farming, episode on this or that, I think it would bring the work of Orwell into a light that will maybe give a lot of people an easier approach.
And you can leave the world something for yourself, how you see the world, which is another question I sent you beforehand, by the way.
I suppose really, to some extent, how do I see myself? Well, in 7 words, which I've conjured up some time ago, that I'm the ordinary son of an extraordinary father. And that's how I would sum myself up.
Well, now we have the title, we can go on.
Point. And what was the time?
Rick, they'll hit it.
And when did you realize that? When did you first actually realize that
who he was?
Who he was, and how what impact his work still has on the world?
I think that the answer to your question is twofold. One, of course, the realization of who he was, of course, grew slowly as I grew up. I suppose the various staging points were, of course, when I first read Animal Farm, when I was 11, 12, and then possibly 1984 when I was about 14, and then read the rest of his books from time to time as I was growing older. I think that his reputation, of course, also grew with time. When he died, yes, he was an established writer, but not with the general public. He was an established writer with people who were intellectuals, who were interested. and he was a man that people recognized as this man, you know, Orwell has got something to say, and his writing is easily read, simple, because of his. You know.
I think the big thing that spread awareness were two initiatives of Penguin. One was a Penguin in the 60s, progressively brought out all his major works.
Yes.
But they also published this 4-volume work of Sonia and Ian Angus put together, which is, if you like, the small scale version of Peter Davison's Labour.
Yes, yeah. I think his reputation grew in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. I think really the major explosion actually came for two reasons. One was Sonia died in 1980. And also she had wrestled back from a chap called Harrison, who was my father's accountant and who had persuaded my father, and therefore Sonia, that he would have 25% of the earnings of the shares of Orwell, and he made a hash of it. I mean, he wasn't intellectual or anything. I think when he died, at the same time that Sonia died in 1980, we are approaching 1984, and my father's agent, A.M. Heath, who had been an agent for my father, right back in the 40s, when Mark Hamilton was appointed my father's literary executor, the Harrisons were out of the way. The court case that my stepmother Sonia had taken out against the Harrisons to wrestle back the 25% of the shares, which was essentially holding everything back. And the Harrisons were making bad judgments on investments. I think once that had cleared and the estate was now owned 100% of the copyright, because 25% was essentially the copyright that Harrison had, so he was interfering. Once that had been tidied up, and A.M. Heath and Mark Hamilton was in charge, and we were approaching 1984, the whole thing just exploded. So that was this was like a Saturn V, really. This was the booster rocket that just took it into orbit. It had been, yes, he was well known up until then, but he'd been badly marketed. I think it is really, to some extent.
You did have a very good salesman in America who got appointed 4 years ago, though.
Oh, yes, yes. D. Trump, Esquire.
Trump.
That's right. That's right. That must have boosted them. Yeah.
I tell you, when Kellyanne, what's her name,
Yes.
Conway, when Trump was elected president, Kellyanne Conway, his whatever she was, PR lady, said, and because it was painfully obvious that there was far less people outside the Capitol when he was elected versus when Obama was elected, Barack Obama. And but they had tried to say, well, there were more people there. And it's, well, actually, we could just prove that there weren't more people. Well, this is alternative. This is the alternative truth, to understand.
Alternative fact.
Alternative fact. By which time, Amazon went up by 6,000% with the sales of 1984.
It also demonstrated that the Orwell Society was on the map, because we were approached by press and radio and television, not only in England, but all over the world. Various of us gave interviews to different programs and papers, and we continue to, if you like, punch above our weight.
I think so. I think definitely, yeah, absolutely. Well, I think to some extent I probably covered the essentials of my time on Jura, and it was, for a kid, it was wonderful. I thoroughly I obviously thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a great experience, and I think, you know, within the limits of what of my father's problems and ill health, he did everything he could for me in terms of creating the relationship of father-son, and I don't think so I'm extremely proud of him. I suppose in a way it's a relief to not be his biological son, because how do you better it? How do you surpass somebody like Orwell? He's unique, so you couldn't, even if you were a writer. So you'd had to have written something completely different outside. You had to write fairy tales or children's books or something else. But to try and emulate him would have been pointless.
Mm. As it is for all of us.
Yes.
Yes.
But for me, especially. So
yes. Yeah, I understand.
That's a common problem for sons of the fame. You see it with sports people. One of the former captains of England's wife was at school with my mother, and when I came to live up in this part of the world, I ended up playing cricket with his cricket and hockey with his son, who was enormously talented, but he was always Norman Yardley's son in people's minds. He wasn't Richard Yardley, so he never really took it seriously enough, because it's just an invidious position.
Well, you're always in the shadow of your father, and I would have been in the shadow of my father, no question about it. So, in the sense that I was adopted, that's the get out clause. So it answers your question, Uta, a little bit about, about writing my biography.
Yeah, but it does not answer my pledge to dictate your biography.
Yeah, well, there we go. You were going to ask about the society generally.
Yes, since Trump, I think, was the last stroke we had in recent years, but I think there was an upturn in surveillance society and so on after 9/11 already. Before that, we primarily thought those tendencies to be parts of dictatorships somewhere, or the Soviet Union or whatever, and suddenly we do have it in our Western societies.
Yeah, but now, you know, whereas you know, somebody writing in his era, I mean, you know, Custer and others as well, would see it as being state surveillance. The sad thing now is that, in effect, we all volunteer for surveillance, because every time we use a credit card, every time we walk about with our phone, every time we do a keystroke, somebody's surveying it for their own profit, as well as the state. And I mean, I know when we had the bombing in the underground and the bus, because in London and around Britain, probably even more now, but there were so many surveillance cameras for monitoring traffic flow for all sorts of reasons. You know, the fact that the bombers were identified within 3 days absolutely staggered the Americans. But that's the positive, if you like. But the negative is this: we are constantly being
monitored,
watched by somebody.
Yeah,
and it did not stop the bombing itself. But
no, it didn't.
Yeah,
it's, I think, in many ways, because we have so many surveillance cameras, people just live with it. They don't think about it anymore. But the problem is the cameras per se watching the traffic, and that's you can't fault that in a way. It helps. The problem is, I mean, as we spoke about many years ago about having ID cards. The trouble is with ID cards is you can't trust the bloody government not to behave themselves. And that is the problem, that the card itself has lots of information on it, which is actually quite useful. When you go on a laptop, you go to Amazon to buy something, as soon as you put in the first letter of your Christian name, everything's there. Suddenly your name is there, your email, your address, almost your credit card number is on there. So the amount of information that these big companies, Amazon, Google, all these boys, is absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely. Far, far more information than any government would ever have. And they're much better able to use it.
They make fortunes out of it.
Yeah, give it to a government, they go and bugger it up.
Look at Bezos. I mean,
this is the thing. Governments are already buying information from commercial companies.
Oh yes, very much so.
Yeah,
So,
because saves them a lot of trouble, doesn't it?
yes, it does, because the information is already there, so they can just buy it and use it for themselves. And this is where the okay, so they show me some advertising and it's colorful and blinking. This is not a valid statement anymore, because it's not only a colorful picture that's been shown to you, but there's the whole cascade of other stuff adding to it. Yeah.
I mean, generally speaking, all this stuff is benign for 98% of the time. It's just background noise, and no one ever pays any attention to it. So for you and me, for the four of us, I don't think anybody in our respective governments is actually paying much attention to us, really. Not unless you're going to go and bomb you, and they might sit up and take note. But otherwise, it just gets lost in the clutter of the background noise. But nevertheless, I mean, I think it is generally viewed that the UK has more cameras per capita than anybody else in the world.
But
it would appear to be so.
Yes, and but what Fenna and probably also knows, or probably has also read in recent days, what we see currently in Belarus, they're not only the journalists but also the authors who are being shut up first. So it's not that far away that whatever they have on tape or on record anywhere about us, what we're talking here, what we've written, what we've researched, our research history probably, if we're not careful, can all be used against us.
Well, I suppose, yes. Sorry, Quentin.
I mean, we saw that Trump has viciously attacked any independent press. These are all very worrying circumstances.
Actually, when I was younger, I always thought all the time in which Orwell wrote, it was so new and so courageous to write something like that. But obviously, they also had courageous publishing houses that were also publishing it. If I take some of the stuff that I've written to a publishing house, I don't find anybody anymore that would just publish it and say, yeah, well, let's do that together.
Yes.
Well, look at the problem he had when he was trying to get Animal Farm published. He had taken it to Gollancz, he had taken it to T.S. Eliot, of Faber and Faber.
Yeah.
And of course, T.S. Eliot actually shot himself in the foot twice. He shot himself in the foot once because he rejected Animal Farm for very silly reasons. But of course, had he accepted Animal Farm, he may well have got 1984 as well.
Yeah.
So he missed out on quite a lot of money in the end. Bless him. But there we go. But I mean, look, the other thing about my father, of course, is that if you look at him the other way, he wrote out that famous list, didn't he, in 1945 for the Office of Information in London, which obviously was a government department. Who did he think would not were people who would vote against Great Britain? And he wrote his little famous list of people, of people he thought were anti Great Britain, anti-government,
who were pro-Stalin, basically.
Yeah, he did correct himself now and again, so he was capable of accepting criticism, and where he had said something, he changed his mind and said so. So he didn't mind. He wasn't absolutely, he didn't say something and then never change his mind.
Yeah, this is what also comes out in the George talks you have on the Orwell Society website. So there are people academically viewing the works and show how how he developed also in thinking and in argumenting.
Yeah, well, the important thing about him is that if the circumstances changed, his view reflected the changed circumstance, whereas the people he was competing for airtime in inverted commas, who were driven by ideology, which is exactly what he saw in Spain, people reporting battles that never took place and not reporting battles that did take place. When people were driven by ideology, then they don't change their mind; they just keep repeating it. And you see that, for example, with Paul Preston, who's great authority on the Spanish Civil War, but still continued to pour out rubbish about Richard's father.
He will not be told, because to do so would to admit he was wrong, and some people can't cope with that.
That ability to make a judgment on evidence. Sadly, he's virtually on his own in terms of his importance as a writer. Very few people were big enough as people to say, yeah, I was wrong about that. If you trace his attitude to going to war in the first place, he went from we shouldn't to we damn well should, because the circumstances had changed.
They still are.
Yeah, and the other defense I put up for him, because he was considered to be a bit of a misogynist, had some fairly rigid thoughts about certain things. I think possibly had he lived longer, let's say for another 20 years, there is a fair chance that he might have been in a position to perhaps correct himself a little bit as time went on. I don't think you'd have much time for the woke society of today. We're waiting for that one to hit the fan. In that, of course, there's a certain amount of slavery background in Orwell, which goes back many generations. You don't have to look very hard for it. Yeah, well, that's fine. Okay, nobody condones slavery, for God's sake. But it's a fact of life, isn't it? You can't just airbrush it out because you don't like it. It won't go away. Chucking statues in harbours, it might get rid of it visually. You haven't got rid of the history. So what is the point? Accept it and make your statement. Say you don't like it, but that's the way it is.
And do something. And do something about it with the problems that slavery has around us every day. I mean, there are a lot of child slavery workers today.
Oh God, yes.
And if I don't buy a cheap jeans, but buy fair trade, then I've done more than. That's right.
I mean, the other thing is, we've got these people who cannot cope with things they can't understand, actually, if you think about it, if they want to, this was all statues about slavery, therefore we must get rid of the statues. Okay, we'll have to get rid of half the public buildings in the United Kingdom because they were all built on the back of slavery for money. So, all right, Mr. Woke, here's a sledgehammer, get on with it.
Yeah, and the thing is, my grandma put it a pretty good way in a very small environment. When she taught me how to knit, and I obviously made mistakes. And most of the times she just raveled it off and knit it back until where I was and corrected my mistake. And when I got on and got better, then she let the mistake and said, okay, you know you made a mistake there. You see it every time you're wearing that thing. And the next time you won't make that mistake again. So she left me the things to see that something was wrong to make it better the next time. And if we're destroying everything what there was in the past, yes, of course, this is a statement, but to clear out the remembrance of it won't make our society realize over time that there were the mistakes, and probably those mistakes can repeat themselves again because nobody's thinking again of it.
Yes, if you get rid of the mistakes, then there's nothing to refer back to.
Yeah.
To say, that's what happened then. We'd think about it in 200 years' time, we may be doing things now that in 200 years' time, the new woke will say, we can't have that. That's terrible. I can't think of anything particular that we're doing that.
We're destroying the ocean.
Yes,
And
right.
the rest of the world, and the thing with the surveillance capitalism.
So there you go.
Well, we've got all those people in Europe who are driving on the wrong side of the road.
Yes, that too.
And that's all you know that is all due to Napoleon?
Yes.
Yes.
We follow the Romans.
Yeah.
The Romans drove on the left-hand side because your left hand for the reins, the right hand
for the sword.
So you were right hand to right hand. And if you look at spiral staircases, they always turn the way that the person defending has their arm on the open side.
Yeah. Spiral staircases are anti-clockwise because it's very difficult to climb a staircase, going clockwise and trying to fight your enemy who is coming down with your sword hand, because it has to go around a tight corner. It can't be done. So you have to be left-handed.
Okay, next time I'm in a spiral staircase, I have to really look at that.
You'll find they're all built the same way.
Yeah.
Unless they were all curry-fisted, left-handed.
Well, you've got plenty of schloss to visit that would demonstrate the truth of that.
I would have another question. I know you have a lot of literary people with Orwell Society and with the George talks. There are also lots of literary working with the books, and you have also a lot of historians who are looking on the works and everything. I'm coming from a different perspective. Yes, I'm a writer too, so I'm a bit of a literary nerd. But I'm also working in data privacy, and just the fun question would be, when did you realize that also not only but also Orwell's works, especially in 1984, helped all this this data privacy movement and the hackers communities into their into their work, into their being.
Encouraging them, actually.
Yes, they do.
What
Did you realize that, Richard?
Sorry?
Did you realize that, Richard?
What, that my father was responsible?
No, that he is kind of encouraging people to work against, put it not mildly, slavery of oppression through surveillance governments.
Well, yeah.
I suppose the author you think of in that respect probably is Stieg Larsson, who whose novels came out of his drive to expose the way governments behaved.
Yeah, so that's how Orwell. I mean, he wrote about the things that brings your attention to what, as he said, I write because I want to expose some lies, something that. Let's say just some lie that is being put forward by governments in order to control people or to get their point of view over. And that's why that was one of the reasons why he wrote.
I don't know whether the guy that is behind Bellingcat has been inspired by Orwell. I think I ought to find out. He lives between where Richard lives and where I live. I mean, the piece of work they did on the poisoning of Navalny was absolutely.
Oh yes, yes.
Did you watch that? There were Navalny made this man who'd put the poison on his underpants. I think he was a higher ranking officer in the secret police in Russia. Absolutely phenomenal. So why didn't he die? Well, he would have died, but the pilot brought the plane down quickly.
Yes, right.
Well, that's right. That's why Skripal. I mean, the Russians said, well, of course, if it had been us who poisoned him, he would have been dead. Actually, you did poison him, and you made a bollocks of it.
Thanks heaven. Thanks heaven.
Yeah.
No, but what I meant is that
Sorry, we're not answering your question.
Not yet, but probably we're getting there, because what I meant is something that's I think never actually pointed out, but what I feel is that Orwell and especially 1984 are underlying and accompanying the whole hackers movement, like CCC in Germany, or no, it's not equivalent, but also the EFF in the US, who have something to orientate themselves by, and
like a good hacking movement that would sort of be appreciated by someone like Orwell.
Yes, probably.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Hacking with style. Yes,
Yeah,
well, of course.
that's nice. Hacking with style, yes.
Yeah, it's that white hat hacking movement where you say, okay, we find the mistakes, we report them, we give the people the opportunity to repair stuff, and not use it against people. So this is what I mean. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yes, he wrote 1984 simply to show us what can happen if you allow people in authority to get their own way.
Yeah.
And that's really what it's all about, isn't it? If you distill him down to a few words, a few sentences, that is what it's about. It's about control. And we will always control people. We have controlled people since millennia, and we will continue to do until such time as we blow ourselves up or we move on to something.
That's why the Cold War was so convenient for governments, because they could say, there's the bogeyman, behave yourself.
Yes.
In 2001, I did a lot of work for the Japanese company NSK, and one of the bits of work, or two bits of work for them in Poland. And one of them was a plant in Kielce that had made a lot of products, but was also including bearings. And when it was sold by the government, NSK bought it as a European base. And when I was first taken to the plant, I was given a big tour of this massive site. And sort of every 100 meters around the edge of the site, there was something that was very obviously a bunker and gun emplacement. And, I said, well, why did you have these? Well, we were told that NATO was coming any minute now. Well, we had the same thing. We got the early warning system up on the Yorkshire Moors at Farlingdales, 4-minute warning, kiss your bottom goodbye, and that was that. Governments like to have that. I mean, Napoleon was the bogeyman before the Cold War.
Yes, that's why we built all the forts.
For governments to keep you frightened.
Yes, that's why we built all these damn forts out in the English Channel to keep Napoleon at bay. Yeah. Now we sell them off as hotels. Or try to.
Yeah.
But we haven't answered your question yet, have we? we keep on
really,
going round in circles.
I'm not sure that there is a clean answer, to be honest.
No, the question was only actually if you realized at some point, or when actually you realized that let's say it pretty blunt, your father is and his works, so he is the hero of a whole movement of people.
We hadn't articulated that until you said it to us. I think it's a straightforward answer.
Okay.
But it's true though. I think in that respect, he really is a hero to a lot of people that say we will not have anything like 1984 happen, and we'll work for that or against that. That happens. Yeah.
Against that happening.
Yeah.
You have been warned.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although it wasn't a warning. He didn't write it as a warning. He wrote it as something that could happen, but not necessarily would. But nevertheless, it was a scenario that could play out if you allowed it to.
The nearest equivalent to that was the Sinclair Lewis book.
Continue.
It couldn't happen here. I don't know if you read that.
No.
It was written in the mid-late 30s in America about a candidate for presidency who handed out money and formed these militia. Well, it's frighteningly like what Trump was up to. It's well worth a read. Sinclair Lewis. It couldn't happen here.
I'll have to write that down.
Noted, and will come in the show notes for the podcast. Yes. Is there anything that you see in our society or societies that you think is also a good movement, a good development?
A good development, you say?
Yes.
In society generally? Well, it's an interesting, it's a bit of a conundrum really, because in many ways society can be bloody stupid, yet collectively, it usually comes up with the right answer. I'm not quite sure how else to explain it. Because
I think the press and media believe that bad news sells.
Yeah, well,
we get a very distorted view of humanity because most of what you see on press and television is something that's bad news. Old lady helped across the road doesn't sell many newspapers. But in fact, what the pandemic has shown, and I'm sure it's shown in Austria and Germany as well, is that an enormous amount of voluntary effort by all sorts of people has helped others through it.
Mm.
Yes.
And that to me is encouraging. You know, we had this chap die the other day who he was turned 100 last year, and he decided he would walk up and down with his walker up and down his garden 100 times, and people sponsored him to raise money for the National Health Service, and he raised 33 million pounds. So what we're talking, 36, 38 million euros equivalent. And he and other people copied. So you got, you know, children raising maybe £1,000, adults raising up to £1 million or more, inspired by what this old man had done. Sadly, he died last week with the COVID. You know, there's an awful lot of good that goes on that nobody ever knows about normally. That one we heard about because it got all the publicity you would expect, and he got knighted by the Queen and what have you. But underlying that is all the millions of people who contributed to create that huge 33 million.
Yes, because generally speaking, the press, I mean, at the moment, all you get from them is at the front page is how many people have got COVID today, how many people are in hospital today, how many people died today. It's all, as Quentin says, bad news sells. Good news doesn't particularly, but eventually you wring it out of them. If it has merit, then they will
well,
print it.
Got another statistic, which is the good news one. How many people have been vaccinated?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Lucky you.
Yes. Well, we won't go down that road.
I get vaccinated tomorrow. First time one. Liz got vaccinated yesterday, and Richard and Eleanor have both been vaccinated first jab.
Yay! Good luck.
So there we go. But,
we're a long way from that, Klaudia, aren't we?
Yep.
But
yes.
Again,
Well, you're not old enough to be vaccinated.
But again, if you think about the speed at which those vaccines have arrived compared to normal,
yes.
Everybody thinks it was all done in months. It wasn't. You know, the Turkish couple in Germany have been doing that research for 15, 20 years. The lady leading the research for the AstraZeneca at Oxford, again, the preparatory work had been going on for 20 years. And you know, I've always said to people who work for me in business, when you've got a problem, for sure, there's somebody at university who's got the answer, is looking for the problem to solve, to demonstrate that their thinking works. And you know, that's a very good manifestation. If people are funded to do this fundamental work, when there's a real need, then it can be mobilized quite quickly. And I mean, I hope that we now get quicker reactions. You know, people have learned that a lot of these processes can be speeded up. You know, these are encouraging things, very encouraging.
It reminds me of a story that there was a program on television a number of years ago of the rabbis in Manchester. Apparently the rabbis in Manchester are the sort of the hub of intellectualism for some reason. And one of them said, I can't remember what the question was, but he said, well, the thing is, we go through the Torah looking for problems so we can find answers to solve it. I thought actually that was it was bloody funny and quite clever. I thought, yeah, well, and that's to some extent, that's what you were saying, Quentin, is that people have been doing research on abstract things. And eventually that is, somebody comes along and says, well, have you done some work on such and such? Oh, yes, we've been doing that for years. I never really come up. Oh, well, I think we could use that.
Yeah, I mean, well, the research work behind the Pfizer one was for cancer treatments.
Yeah, yeah,
And
it's
they
great.
repurposed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. BioNTech is for years and years has been doing that, and
Well,
the
they're
people
near neighbours of yours, aren't they?
in Tübingen, the people are also working on cancer, and now they've sort of changed it into COVID, and their vaccination will come out around, they hope, around July, and that will be one where you only have to take one shot and still have 95% or 96%.
Johnson and Johnson's is a one-shot one too. That's just going through its proving trials.
Yeah. I'm just looking, Klaudia, at some of the questions you've written down here.
Oh,
which I don't think
we're
we've
nearly
touched
at the end of all my questions. No,
You think-
never. But
You know, what is your advice for generations to come?
yes.
I think be very be alert. Be aware of what's going on around you. Don't take you know, things for granted, but do ask yourself what's going on in the background. Why is the government saying this? What are they trying to put over? And just be aware of. You might have to go along with it. Who knows?
One day we'll find a politician who thinks it's a good idea to
tell the truth, but that'd be novel.
Actually, I really would like to ask you two, since we're coming to the end of it, and for me it's a really burning question, because both Klaudia and I like to visit your country. Do you think that in not too long a time we will be at a point where we can actually say you will rejoin being Europeans?
Not in my time.
I think, I mean, if we started today, at the pace those things go, you'd probably talk 10, 20 years before it could happen. I hope that we can get back to some better form of normality than the situation we currently have.
There will be a lot of pushing and shoving and tension and compressions going on, and we will find a way to live amicably together and hopefully trade, if nothing else. So I mean, that's the way I see it.
You have to remember, it was far from a resounding yes. I mean, it was either side of 50. So there was an enormous number of people, especially young people, who voted to remain.
Well, of course, we have to remember that General de Gaulle said no all those years ago.
Yeah. But but for somebody like me with a lot of family who live in France and Belgium, and I've never had a problem with this business of multiple identities, which is the problem of the Brexit seekers. I think it was summed up. Liz did a course on cultural tourism at Sheffield University, and they had to do a visit, and they had a choice between Linz or Leipzig, and she chose to go to Leipzig, and the girl who powered up with her on the course was there, and they were sort of looking around, and this gentleman arrived with a flourish, with a hat with a feather in it and a cape, and announced himself as a Leipziger, a Saxon, a German, and a European. And why can't we all look at life like that? There's one of the dreadful things is that people can't you can't say I'm in favor of something without automatically saying you're against something else. It's perfectly reasonable for you to be in favor of something and somebody else to be in favor of something else. It doesn't mean you've got to fall out.
Oh, no, I hope not.
But that's
Well,
what people,
that's what they're doing. I think the thing is,
that's the problem now. It's too much of this.
It's too black and white.
Yeah.
I think, you know, if you disagree with something, you then amicably say to your opponent, well, you have your view, I have mine. Let's agree to disagree.
Yeah.
But let's not fall out. Let's not kill each other for it.
But people have fallen out inside families over Trump and over
God,
Brexit.
yes.
It's a bit like it's been like a civil war.
Well, it's like the Civil War, the Spanish Civil War. There are families who are still won't talk to each other.
Well, and in the southern states, it hasn't ended yet. As you see,
in the coal mining areas of England, Yorkshire and Nottingham, there are coal miners who still have fallen out with each other, who are pro or against that famous strike back in 1984, which did for the coal mines eventually.
Yeah,
but this is an interesting perspective on the thing, because we when analyzing as well as Trump as also Brexit, we always have a view on internet communication and social media and discussion forums and so on, and the tendencies to trolling, derailing, and so on, that all lead to discussions no longer being being possible, because the parts of the discussion, the people are so divided that there's no further communication possible.
Yeah, that's it.
That's the dreadful thing.
And if we say, okay, there were equally difficult situations long before the internet was, what went wrong there, and how did people get over it, if they got over it, and what could we use from their means of communication that could help us today.
Well, then we have to learn to listen first again.
The good Lord gave us two of these, and only one of these. And unfortunately, they're used in inverse proportion.
For all the people who only hear right now, so he showed we have two eyes and two ears and only one mouth.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
too many of these forums. And, that includes, responsible for things like, Financial Times, if you respond to an article. The vast majority of people hide behind pseudonyms. If people had to put their own name, would they say some of the dreadful things they do to other people?
Yes, they would. This is
what they were held accountable for it, then they wouldn't do it for very long.
Yeah, but that's the thing. People are also saying all those horrible things with their real name on internet forums. So the pseudonyms are not the problem. The problem is that people are not afraid anymore of being fined for being cruel.
Yeah.
And
we
pseudonyms.
Saw a substantial rise in racism in Britain after the Brexit vote. A substantial rise in anti-Semitism as well.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Particularly on the left, the Labour Party.
Labour Party are riddled with anti-Semitism.
Interesting.
Which is
the problem is
make sense.
They conflate the government of Israel with being Jewish. There are plenty of Jewish people who are very critical of Netanyahu and don't agree with him at all, who live in Israel, let alone outside Israel, because the left support the Palestinians, that then becomes, anti-Semitic actions as a result, and it's been awful.
As we are going down a dangerous road here, are we not?
Yeah, but I think we're still in the same. What's the appropriate word for that? In the same. Fenna, help me out. Fahrwasser. So in the same waters.
In the same waters. We're not in shallow waters. No, I don't think so. I actually think the biggest problem that we have at the moment is when we communicate, that whatever we hear or whatever we say to another person that might not be of our mind, we start getting cautious and we don't speak our. And I see a really difficulty that they don't speak our minds and have the courage to say, I see, you have a totally different opinion. Okay, I listen to your opinion. And no, we don't have to have the same opinion. We don't have to come together at one point, but at least we can respect each other.
Exactly.
That's yes.
Yeah.
That's where we lack.
That's what Orwell said about writing. Break any one of these rules. This is the rules for writing. Break any one of these rules rather than say something absolutely outrageous. We have to be careful, I think, of yes, we can say, controversial things to each other, which is the problem, of course, is that we're frightened to do so.
When we're at a point where people are afraid of saying something that could upset other people. So like, okay, can I say Brexit in this discussion? Can I say Trump in this discussion? Can I say I don't like cherries or whatever? Yeah. Are we already 3 or 4 steps down the road of 1984?
Well, I think that's the real situation. I mean, we know people who we will not discuss the Brexit with, because we know they disagree with us, and they get very, very upset. And it's not, we're not in the business of upsetting people.
No, certainly not. But I can think of a couple who would, if you mention anything like that, they just it's not going anything. Oh, for God's sake, do we not talk about it?
Because you can't have if you like, an old-fashioned to and fro discussion where together you sift evidence and come to conclusions. People have got, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about Orwell. He changed his mind as the circumstances dictated.
Probably we would like to have a society where those discussions, to and fro discussions and so on, are not only okay-ish again, but are the standard for communicating and to get to the point, okay, agree to disagree, which is a totally fine way of coping with things if we come to the conclusion that we don't share alike for cherries or whatever.
I mean, your politics is sort of 50-50, isn't it, between some quite right-wing people?
Or religion.
Have you seen the statue at the BBC, Uta?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, and the inscription on the wall: "If freedom means anything, it is the right to say something that other people do not want to hear."
Yes.
Which I think is a good baseline from which to start discussions.
Yes, that's true.
Yes.
It's not absolute, because there are some things that you just, as we were saying earlier on, are absolutely unacceptable. But nevertheless.
That's really what Klaudia was saying, in a sense, that we are self-censoring rather than say something that we know somebody doesn't want to hear.
Yeah, well, I'm working in data privacy. I am in the business of upsetting people normally. But so I'm actually used to being the one with the unwanted opinion in the room.
Yeah.
Because normally it makes people uneasy to get to know that things are not as good as they thought they are, and so on and so on forth. And I know it's no fun. It really is no fun. I would totally like it or love it if people would like me. And not that I would be the person to blame in parentheses, because I'm making them work. So yeah.
Are you one of these people that walks into a room, introduces a controversial subject, and then stands back and waits for the explosion?
No, I'm actually standing in the middle of the room, getting all the explosion on me. Fenna knows that. She was there when it happened once. Yes.
Well, we're happy for you to plug the Orwell Society. www.orwellsociety.com.
We're also happy if you join it, my dear.
We look forward to.
I think I'll have to because
no choice.
As I mentioned before, George Orwell is a big hero of a lot of people that I know, and I can show you. This is I'm holding in the camera a T-shirt from I think 2 years ago from the EFF, the cat that's sitting under the surveillance camera and reading 1984.
Very good.
Books are 1984. I want that. I want that.
You can. I think they still have it at EFF.com. I think it is.
I want that.
Yes.
I take it the tail is deliberately obscuring the lens.
Probably, yes. And so yes, joining the Orwell Society is possible for everyone, I think.
We had a funny thing on a previous visit to Spain. We went to the Plaza Orwell, you know, this little.
The square, yes.
The square, and there were a couple of young Russian ladies, I suppose, you know, 18, 20-year-old maybe, and they saw that Rick had actually got a book with Orwell written on it in his hands, and they said, could we borrow that book for a photo? And I said to them, do you realize who the chap is who's holding the book? And they said no. I said, well, that's George Orwell's son. You're pulling my leg. No, it really is. And so they then said, can we have a photograph with Rick in it?
They were very attractive young ladies.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. You do come across these oddities from time to time. That was the
first time I'd taken Rick to see that square.
Yeah.
And have they become members of the Orwell Society already?
Well, as far as we know, no.
Sadly not.
But you will, and it's very easy because, and for all the listeners, you can do it on the Orwell website now, and just go to the shop part of the website.
There's a tag for join here, and you complete the form online, put your banking details in, and then I write to you.
Yeah.
To welcome you.
Yes.
We'll do that. So for all the listeners and people who are watching this, go to the form and become a member of the Orwell Society. And then you can also, or you get invitations to those George talks, which I'm already really curious about. Some of them are already on the website.
We have a George talk from one of our members, This February one is actually Richard talking about his life on Jura. Rebecca Solnit will be doing one in November about her new book on Orwell's love of nature.
You are doing.
I'm doing one
a couple.
in April, the day after our AGM, with Mark Wildemish, who did the biography of my father, is talking with me about my father. And when we're allowed to again, of course, I will be organising all sorts of in-person events. One of those you can get a flavour of on the website for George Talks, because every year on the nearest Sunday to his birthday, we go and visit him in his grave, and Richard reads something at the graveside, and we couldn't do it this year, but Helen, the priest in charge of the church, went, and we had her Zoom link on screen showing the grave as Richard read. It was very good. That's a lovely event because members can get together. There's no limit on numbers as there are for some events, and new members get to meet the rest of us and make friends, and it's a good way of old friends meeting up who are geographically split up and can't see each other that often. We're a very friendly group of people.
There's one talk with Diane on the founding of the Orwell Society, which is really interesting. You can see it on the website too. And just between us, 70 years and not a day more.
Very good.
But no, wonderful talk, and also with Nicola Rossi. She's a writer, and there's a George talk with her, which I found pretty interesting as a fellow author. And yeah.
Well, I mean, Nicola's an interesting person in that she had a career in PR jobs in big companies. And she decided to do a master's in writing at London University Goldsmith College. Heard about our competition for writing a dystopian story. She was a runner-up, but that gave her the confidence that she'd got a voice, and that voice is now evident in the first two books of her trilogy, Rockstar Ending and Rock On. And she's well on with writing the third one, which are wonderful books in that they are full of serious, thought-provoking messages, if you like, but delivered in a way that makes you smile. I mean, she does wonderful acronyms that are really good. So I would very much recommend anybody reading Nicola's book, Nicola Rossi.
Yep. Yeah, I just watched the George talk in right before we started our interview here. So I just came to okay, I have a bookmark and have to download this book later today, or probably also the print version. See about that, but they will do that after joining Orwell Society.
Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you joined.
Is there anything you want people more to know?
Well, I suppose the thing is we could be here all night, couldn't we?
Yes.
Well, there comes a point when
the other advantages of membership are we publish a journal in the middle of the year and before Christmas that has a range of interesting articles, from the very serious to some very nice light-hearted ones. We have the website is an enormous resource with past articles and information. And well, we last year we did a member survey, and one of the most heartening things about that was that people love the camaraderie of it.
Yes.
And you've seen some of the evidence of that in the George talks, where normally, because academics are judged individually and it's quite competitive about who gets what published and all the rest of it, they tend to have their elbows out rather than helping each other. What we're getting now is that authors on Orwell are able to contact each other through the Orwell Society and help each other. And for Dione, that has been one of the wonderful things that's happened as a consequence of her inspiration to create the society.
So thank you very, very much. It was a real pleasure and a big honor for me to talk to you guys.
It's been a pleasure too.
Absolutely.
Thank
And
you.
we wouldn't, to have gone on long, we would need to keep back some of the secrets for a later one.
Well,
But anyway, it was a pleasure talking to you, Klaudia, and thank you for asking us. Okay, I shall look forward to that.
So thank you very much, and goodbye to all our listeners and viewers, and have a very nice day then.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.